In the winter of 1923, federal investigator Samuel Crawford arrived in the remote mountains of eastern Tennessee to investigate reports of missing federal revenue agents who had vanished while pursuing moonshine operations in the region. What he discovered in the fog-shrouded hollows would haunt him for the rest of his life and expose one of the most disturbing family traditions in American history. The Grayson clan, isolated in their mountain stronghold for over a century, had developed a systematic practice of cannibalism that began as a survival mechanism during the harsh winter of 1834, but had evolved into a ritualized tradition that governed their entire social structure. For 90 years, the Graysons had been feeding on their own family members according to elaborate ceremonies and ancient rules that determined who lived, who died, and who would be consumed to sustain the rest of the clan through the lean months when other food sources failed. What Crawford uncovered was not random acts of desperation, but a carefully organized system of human sacrifice and consumption that had been refined across 4 generations. The Graysons had developed their own twisted theology that justified cannibalism as a sacred duty, created hierarchies that determined whose flesh was most valuable, and established rituals that transformed murder into religious ceremony. The clan's cannibalistic practices had shaped every aspect of their culture, from marriage customs that bred victims for consumption to child-rearing practices that prepared the young for their eventual role as either predator or prey within the family's horrifying social order. Before we explore this nightmare that challenges everything we think we know about family loyalty, survival, and the depths of human depravity, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the darkest corners of American history. Share this story with anyone brave enough to confront the possibility that some family traditions are too horrifying to comprehend. And let us know in the comments what you think could drive an entire clan to systematically consume their own blood relatives. The Grayson clan's descent into cannibalism began during the catastrophic winter of 1834, when an early blizzard trapped the extended family in their remote mountain settlement with insufficient food supplies to last until spring. Patriarch Josiah Grayson, a stern Presbyterian who had moved his family into the Tennessee mountains to escape what he considered the moral corruption of lowland society, faced an impossible choice as starvation claimed the weakest members of his clan and threatened to destroy the entire community he had worked decades to build. The initial act of cannibalism was born of desperation rather than choice. When Josiah's youngest daughter, 7-year-old Mary, died of starvation in February 1835, the family patriarch made the decision that would damn his bloodline for generations. Rather than burying the child's body in the frozen ground or allowing it to decompose uselessly, Josiah convinced his family that consuming Mary's flesh was not only necessary for survival, but represented a sacred duty to ensure that her death would preserve the lives of her relatives. Josiah's theological justification for cannibalism drew on his twisted interpretation of Christian communion, arguing that consuming family members who had died was a form of sacred unity that honored the deceased while preserving their spiritual essence within the living. His persuasive religious rhetoric, combined with the stark reality of starvation, convinced the surviving family members to participate in what would become the first of countless cannibalistic rituals that would define the Grayson clan for nearly a century. The success of the family's survival through that terrible winter, which claimed dozens of lives in neighboring communities, seemed to validate Josiah's decision and reinforce his theological interpretations. The Graysons emerged from the winter of 1834 to 35 as one of the few intact families in their region, a fact that Josiah attributed to divine providence and the sacred nature of their cannibalistic communion with the deceased. However, the psychological and spiritual corruption that had been introduced into the family during that winter would prove far more destructive than any physical hardship they had endured. Josiah's eldest son, Abraham, had been deeply traumatized by participating in the consumption of his sister's body, but he had also discovered that the act of cannibalism produced intense psychological and spiritual experiences that he found both terrifying and addictive. Abraham's journals, discovered by Crawford 90 years later, documented the gradual transformation of emergency cannibalism into ritualized practice. The young man described experiencing visions and supernatural encounters during cannibalistic ceremonies that convinced him that consuming human flesh provided access to spiritual powers and divine knowledge that were not available through conventional religious practice. The development of the Grayson clan's cannibalistic theology was accelerated by their complete isolation from outside religious influence and their patriarch's increasing obsession with creating a pure and self-sufficient community that would be worthy of divine favor. Josiah began to see their mountain settlement as a new Eden, where his family could develop their own relationship with God without interference from the corrupted churches and communities of the outside world. The theological framework that emerged from Josiah's teachings established cannibalism as the highest form of Christian communion, arguing that consuming the flesh of family members was a literal interpretation of Christ's command to eat my body and drink my blood. According to Grayson theology, family members who were consumed in cannibalistic rituals achieved immediate salvation and continued to live spiritually within the bodies of those who had eaten their flesh. This twisted theology created powerful incentives for family members to participate in cannibalistic practices while providing psychological justification for what would otherwise be recognized as murder and desecration. The Graysons convinced themselves that they were not destroying family members, but rather transforming them into a higher spiritual state that benefited both the consumed and the consumers. The practical implementation of systematic cannibalism required the development of elaborate rules and procedures that determined which family members would be selected for consumption and under what circumstances such rituals would be performed. The clan developed what they called the sacred selection, a process that combined religious ceremony with practical considerations about nutrition, family dynamics, and the maintenance of genetic diversity within their isolated population. The sacred selection process was conducted by a council of elders led by the clan patriarch, who used a combination of prayer, divination, and practical assessment to determine which family members had been called by God to sacrifice themselves for the spiritual and physical nourishment of their relatives. The selection criteria included considerations of age, health, reproductive status, and perceived spiritual worthiness that created a complex hierarchy within the family structure. Young children and elderly family members were considered the most spiritually pure, and therefore the most valuable for cannibalistic consumption, while adults in their prime reproductive years were typically spared unless they had committed serious violations of clan rules or had been deemed spiritually corrupt. The selection process created constant tension and anxiety within the family, as members lived in fear of being chosen, while also competing to demonstrate their spiritual worthiness and practical value to the community. The cannibalistic rituals developed by the Grayson clan were elaborate ceremonies that combined elements of Christian communion with practices that appeared to derive from much older and darker spiritual traditions. The rituals were conducted in a specially constructed underground chamber that served as both slaughterhouse and sacred space, where family members were killed, butchered, and prepared for consumption according to precise religious protocols. The ritual space was decorated with symbols and artifacts that reflected the clan's twisted theology, including crude crucifixes made from human bones, altars stained with dried blood, and walls covered with religious texts that had been modified to support cannibalistic interpretations of Christian doctrine. The chamber served as the spiritual center of the Grayson settlement, where the most important family decisions were made and the most sacred ceremonies were performed. The preparation of human flesh for consumption followed detailed procedures that were designed to maximize both nutritional value and spiritual significance. Different parts of the body were assigned different meanings and values, with the heart and brain being reserved for the most important family members, while other organs and tissues were distributed according to a complex hierarchy that reflected each participant's status within the clan. The consumption of human flesh was conducted as a solemn religious ceremony that included prayers, hymns, and testimonials from family members who testified to the spiritual benefits they had received from previous cannibalistic rituals. The ceremonies were designed to reinforce the theological justifications for cannibalism while creating powerful psychological and social bonds among the participants. Federal investigator Samuel Crawford first learned of the Grayson clan's existence through his investigation of missing revenue agents who had disappeared while pursuing illegal distillery operations in the remote mountains of eastern Tennessee. Crawford, an experienced federal agent who had spent years tracking bootleggers and moonshiners throughout Appalachia, initially assumed that the missing agents had been killed by criminals seeking to protect their illegal operations. However, Crawford's investigation revealed disturbing patterns that suggested something far more sinister than typical criminal violence. The missing agents had vanished without leaving any evidence of struggle or resistance, while their horses and equipment had been found abandoned in locations that showed no signs of ambush or conflict. The pattern suggested that the agents had been lured or deceived rather than overpowered by force. Crawford's inquiries among local residents revealed a conspiracy of silence surrounding the Grayson clan that went beyond typical mountain reluctance to cooperate with federal authorities. Even hardened criminals and moonshiners seemed genuinely terrified when questioned about the Graysons, with several individuals warning Crawford that investigating the clan would lead to his own disappearance and death. The investigator's persistence in pursuing leads about the missing agents eventually brought him into contact with Ezra Thompson, a former member of the Grayson clan who had escaped from their mountain settlement 15 years earlier, but had never spoken about his experiences due to terror and trauma. Thompson's testimony provided Crawford with the first detailed account of the clan's cannibalistic practices and the horrifying fate that had befallen the missing federal agents. According to Thompson's account, the Grayson clan had been systematically luring and capturing outsiders for decades, using them as sacrificial victims in their cannibalistic rituals while maintaining the fiction that such individuals had simply disappeared in the dangerous mountain terrain. The clan had developed sophisticated methods for identifying and targeting isolated travelers who could be captured without attracting attention or investigation. The missing federal agents had been perfect targets for the Graysons' predatory activities, as they were operating alone in remote areas while pursuing illegal activities that made their disappearance seem like the natural consequence of dangerous criminal investigations. The clan had used their knowledge of moonshine operations to lure the agents into carefully prepared ambushes where they could be captured and transported to the clan's mountain stronghold. Thompson's description of the agents' fate was so horrifying that Crawford initially refused to believe the testimony, dismissing it as the delusions of a traumatized individual who had been mentally damaged by some other traumatic experience. However, Thompson's knowledge of specific details about the missing agents, including information that had not been released to the public, convinced Crawford that the testimony was at least partially accurate and required serious investigation. The location of the Grayson settlement was so remote and well concealed that Crawford required Thompson's guidance to reach the clan's mountain stronghold. The journey required 3 days of hiking through terrain so difficult and dangerous that Crawford began to understand how the clan had maintained their isolation and avoided detection by law enforcement for nearly a century. The approach to the Grayson settlement revealed evidence of the clan's systematic efforts to monitor and control access to their territory. Hidden observation posts, concealed traps, and deliberately misleading trail markers demonstrated that the Graysons had created an elaborate defensive system designed to prevent unwanted intrusion while providing early warning of approaching threats. Crawford's first sight of the Grayson settlement confirmed Thompson's testimony about the clan's size and organization. The community consisted of approximately 60 individuals living in a collection of crude structures that had been built and modified over several generations. The settlement showed signs of long-term habitation and careful planning, with defensive features and resource management systems that indicated sophisticated understanding of mountain survival and security. The most disturbing aspect of the settlement was the evidence of the clan's cannibalistic practices that was visible throughout the community. Human bones and skulls were incorporated into the architecture and decoration of various buildings, while the underground ritual chamber that Thompson had described was clearly visible as a stone structure that dominated the center of the settlement. Crawford's initial observation of the clan revealed a population that showed clear signs of the genetic and psychological damage that resulted from generations of isolation, inbreeding, and participation in cannibalistic practices. Many clan members displayed physical abnormalities and intellectual impairments that suggested severe genetic problems, while their behavior patterns indicated psychological disturbances that were consistent with prolonged exposure to extreme violence and trauma. The clan's reaction to Crawford's arrival was initially cautious rather than hostile, as they seemed genuinely curious about the outside world and eager to share their theological beliefs with someone who might appreciate their spiritual achievements. The current patriarch, Josiah Grayson IV, invited Crawford to participate in their religious ceremonies and to witness the sacred cannibalistic rituals that he described as the highest expression of Christian faith. Crawford's documentation of the Grayson clan's cannibalistic practices was conducted under extremely dangerous circumstances, as he realized that accepting their hospitality would likely result in his own death and consumption. The investigator was forced to maintain a facade of interest and respect for their beliefs, while secretly documenting evidence and planning his escape from the mountain settlement. The clan's theological explanations for their cannibalistic practices revealed the sophisticated rationalization system that had been developed over 4 generations to justify murder and consumption of family members. The Graysons had created an elaborate mythology that portrayed their clan as God's chosen people, who had been granted special spiritual insights and powers through their willingness to practice true Christian communion. According to Grayson theology, the outside world had been corrupted by false religious teachings that prevented people from achieving true spiritual union with God. Only through the consumption of human flesh could individuals achieve the level of spiritual purity necessary for divine salvation, while those who rejected cannibalistic practices were doomed to eternal damnation as punishment for their spiritual cowardice. The clan's religious practices included elaborate ceremonies designed to demonstrate their spiritual superiority and divine favor. Crawford observed rituals that combined cannibalistic consumption with prayer, singing, and testimonials from clan members who claimed to have received visions and supernatural experiences as a result of their participation in human sacrifice and consumption. The selection process for determining which family members would be sacrificed revealed the cruel hierarchy that governed clan social structure. The most vulnerable individuals, including children, elderly members, and those with disabilities, were considered the most spiritually valuable and were therefore most likely to be selected for consumption. The selection criteria created a system where weakness and vulnerability were rewarded with death rather than protection and care. Crawford's investigation revealed that the clan had developed detailed procedures for capturing and processing outsiders who were unfortunate enough to encounter their settlement. The missing federal agents had been subjected to elaborate torture and psychological manipulation designed to increase their spiritual value before they were killed and consumed in special ceremonies that celebrated the clan's power over their enemies. The physical evidence of the clan's cannibalistic practices was overwhelming and undeniable. Crawford documented storage areas where human remains were preserved and prepared for consumption, cooking facilities designed specifically for processing human flesh, and religious artifacts made from human bones and other body parts. The settlement had been organized around the practice of cannibalism, with every aspect of clan life designed to support and facilitate their horrifying dietary and religious practices. The psychological impact of discovering the Grayson clan's cannibalistic practices was devastating for Crawford, who struggled to maintain his sanity while documenting evidence of systematic murder and consumption that had been practiced for nearly a century. The investigators' reports reveal a man who was profoundly traumatized by his exposure to the clan's activities and who struggled to find adequate language to describe the horrors he had witnessed. Crawford's escape from the Grayson settlement was accomplished through a combination of luck, careful planning, and the assistance of Thompson, who had remained hidden near the settlement and was able to guide the investigator away from the clan's territory before they realized that their guest was actually a federal agent, investigating their activities. The federal response to Crawford's investigation was swift and decisive, involving multiple agencies and resources that were mobilized to address what officials recognized as one of the most serious criminal cases in American history. The remoteness of the Grayson settlement and the dangerous nature of the clan's activities required careful planning and coordination to ensure that law enforcement personnel could safely approach and apprehend the cannibalistic community. The military-style operation that was launched against the Grayson clan involved federal agents, state police and National Guard units that were equipped and trained for dealing with heavily armed and extremely dangerous criminals. The operation was planned as a siege that would surround the settlement and force the clan to surrender without allowing them to escape or destroy evidence of their crimes. However, the Grayson clan's response to the federal operation revealed the extent of their desperation and their commitment to their cannibalistic practices. Rather than surrender or attempt to escape, the clan chose to conduct what they called the final communion, a mass murder-suicide ritual that was designed to prevent their capture while ensuring that all clan members achieved salvation through cannibalistic consumption. The final communion ritual involved the systematic murder and consumption of all clan members, beginning with the children and elderly individuals who were considered most spiritually valuable and continuing until only the patriarch and a few selected elders remained to complete the ceremony. The ritual was conducted with the same elaborate religious procedures that had governed the clan's cannibalistic practices for decades, demonstrating their unwavering commitment to their twisted theological beliefs. The federal forces that eventually entered the Grayson settlement found a scene of horror that exceeded anything in their previous experience. The underground ritual chamber contained the remains of dozens of clan members who had been killed and partially consumed during the final communion, while other areas of the settlement showed evidence of the systematic destruction of anything that might have been used to preserve the clan's cultural and religious traditions. The investigation of the Grayson settlement revealed the full scope of the clan's cannibalistic practices and provided evidence of crimes that spanned nearly a century. The documentation included detailed records of victims, descriptions of cannibalistic rituals, and theological writings that revealed the sophisticated rationalization system that had supported the clan's activities for 4 generations. The physical evidence recovered from the settlement included human remains representing hundreds of victims, including both clan members and outsiders who had been captured and consumed over the decades. The evidence provided compelling proof of systematic murder and cannibalism that had been practiced on a scale that exceeded anything previously documented in American criminal history. The psychological impact of the Grayson case extended far beyond the immediate investigation to influence law enforcement approaches to isolated communities and religious extremism throughout the United States. The case demonstrated the potential for religious beliefs to be perverted into justifications for extreme violence and provided insights into the psychological mechanisms that could sustain cannibalistic practices across multiple generations. The theological writings and religious artifacts recovered from the Grayson settlement became subjects of academic study for researchers investigating the development of extremist religious beliefs and the psychological factors that enable ordinary people to participate in systematic violence and murder. The case provided unique insights into the process of moral corruption and the role of isolation in enabling the development of deviant social norms. The media coverage of the Grayson case was extensive, but carefully controlled to prevent public panic and to avoid providing detailed information about cannibalistic practices that might inspire copycat crimes. The case challenged conventional assumptions about family bonds and religious faith, while demonstrating the potential for human behavior to descend into depths of depravity that most people considered impossible. The legal proceedings that followed the discovery of the Grayson settlement were complicated by the fact that most of the perpetrators had died during the final communion ritual, leaving only a few survivors who were either too young or too mentally impaired to be held fully responsible for their participation in cannibalistic practices. The case raised complex questions about criminal responsibility and the appropriate response to individuals who had been raised from birth to participate in systematic murder and cannibalism. The few surviving members of the Grayson clan were placed in secure medical facilities where they received treatment for the severe psychological trauma and mental illness that resulted from their upbringing and participation in cannibalistic practices. The survivors' recovery was complicated by their complete lack of understanding of normal social norms and their deep psychological conditioning to accept murder and cannibalism as natural and necessary aspects of human existence. The long-term impact of the Grayson case influenced federal law enforcement policies and procedures for investigating isolated communities and religious extremist groups. The case demonstrated the importance of taking seriously reports of unusual religious practices and the need for specialized training and resources for dealing with communities that had developed deviant social norms through isolation and extremist leadership. The preservation of evidence and documentation from the Grayson case has provided researchers with unprecedented insights into the development and maintenance of cannibalistic practices in isolated human communities. The case has contributed to understanding of the psychological and social factors that enable ordinary people to participate in extreme violence while maintaining their sense of moral righteousness and religious devotion. The academic study of the Grayson case has influenced research into religious extremism, social isolation, and the psychological mechanisms that enable systematic violence and murder. The case provides a unique example of how religious beliefs can be perverted to justify behavior that violates fundamental human values while demonstrating the power of social conditioning to normalize even the most extreme forms of deviance. The ethical questions raised by the Grayson case continue to influence discussions about religious freedom, cultural autonomy, and the appropriate limits of government intervention in isolated communities. The case demonstrates the tension between respecting religious beliefs and protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation and violence, while highlighting the challenges of identifying and addressing extremist communities before they cause irreparable harm. The legacy of the Grayson clan serves as a powerful reminder of the potential for human behavior to descend into depths of depravity that challenge our understanding of moral boundaries and social norms. Their story demonstrates that family bonds and religious faith, which are typically sources of strength and virtue, can be perverted into justifications for the most heinous crimes imaginable when combined with isolation, extremist leadership, and the gradual erosion of moral constraints. The dark story of the Grayson clan, who fed on their own in the Appalachian hills, stands as one of the most disturbing examples of systematic cannibalism in American history, revealing the horrifying potential for human communities to develop practices that violate every principle of civilization and morality. Their legacy continues to challenge our understanding of human nature and the conditions that can enable ordinary people to participate in extraordinary evil while maintaining their conviction that they are serving a higher moral purpose. The detailed investigation conducted by federal authorities in the aftermath of the Grayson discovery revealed the full scope of the clan's cannibalistic practices and provided unprecedented insights into the psychological and social mechanisms that had sustained systematic murder and consumption for nearly a century. The evidence collected from the settlement included thousands of pages of religious writings, detailed records of victims and ceremonies, and physical artifacts that documented the evolution of cannibalistic practices from desperate survival measure to elaborate religious institution. The theological writings left by the Grayson patriarchs revealed a sophisticated system of beliefs that had been developed over 4 generations to justify and sanctify cannibalistic practices. The writings showed how Josiah Grayson's original desperation-driven decision had been transformed into an elaborate mythology that portrayed the clan as God's chosen people who had been granted special spiritual insights unavailable to the corrupted outside world. The religious texts included detailed instructions for conducting cannibalistic rituals, guidelines for selecting victims, and elaborate theological arguments that claimed to prove the spiritual necessity and divine approval of human consumption. The writings demonstrated how isolated communities could develop belief systems that were completely divorced from mainstream moral and religious understanding, while maintaining internal consistency and apparent logical structure. Dr. Margaret Sinclair, a psychiatrist who was brought in to analyze the psychological aspects of the Grayson case, documented how the clan had used religious indoctrination and social conditioning to normalize cannibalistic practices among children who were born into the community. Her analysis revealed sophisticated techniques for psychological manipulation that ensured each new generation would accept and participate in practices that would horrify normal human beings. The child-rearing practices employed by the Grayson clan were designed to eliminate normal human inhibitions against cannibalism while fostering complete loyalty to clan beliefs and practices. Children were exposed to cannibalistic rituals from infancy, gradually increasing their participation until consumption of human flesh became as natural and unremarkable as any other aspect of daily life. The educational system within the clan included elaborate indoctrination programs that taught children to view outsiders as spiritually inferior beings whose consumption was not only acceptable but religiously mandated. The children were taught that their clan's cannibalistic practices were evidence of their spiritual superiority and divine election, while outsiders were portrayed as corrupted souls whose deaths served God's purpose. The psychological conditioning was reinforced through elaborate reward and punishment systems that encouraged children to embrace cannibalistic practices while punishing any expressions of doubt or resistance. Children who showed enthusiasm for ritual activities were rewarded with increased status and privileges, while those who displayed reluctance or moral qualms were subjected to severe punishment and social isolation. Dr. Sinclair's analysis revealed that the Grayson clan had essentially created a closed psychological system that made it virtually impossible for individuals raised within the community to develop normal moral sensibilities or to question the fundamental assumptions underlying their cannibalistic practices. The conditioning was so thorough and systematic that even intelligent and sensitive individuals were unable to recognize the horror of their situation. The clan's marriage and reproductive practices were carefully controlled to ensure the continuation of their cannibalistic traditions, while maintaining sufficient genetic diversity to prevent the complete collapse of their isolated population. Marriage arrangements were made by clan elders who considered both genetic compatibility and psychological suitability for participating in cannibalistic practices. The selection of marriage partners was based on assessments of individual commitment to clan beliefs, demonstrated enthusiasm for cannibalistic rituals, and perceived ability to successfully indoctrinate children into the community's practices. Individuals who showed signs of moral doubt or psychological resistance to cannibalism were either excluded from reproduction or selected for early consumption to prevent the spread of their deviant attitudes. The clan's reproductive strategies included deliberate efforts to produce children who would be suitable for consumption, as well as those who would continue family lines. Certain family branches were designated as breeding stock, whose primary purpose was to produce victims for cannibalistic rituals, while other lineages were preserved to maintain the clan's leadership and religious traditions. The genetic analysis conducted on surviving clan members revealed evidence of systematic inbreeding that had been practiced to concentrate desirable traits while eliminating characteristics that were considered incompatible with cannibalistic practices. The clan had essentially conducted a century-long experiment in selective breeding designed to create human beings who were psychologically and physiologically adapted to their horrifying lifestyle. The economic system that sustained the Grayson clan was based on a combination of subsistence farming, hunting, and the systematic exploitation of outsiders who were lured to the settlement for consumption. The clan had developed sophisticated techniques for identifying and capturing victims while maintaining their isolation and avoiding detection by law enforcement authorities. The clan's hunting practices included both traditional pursuit of wild game and the systematic stalking of human prey, who could be captured for cannibalistic rituals. They had developed expertise in tracking, trapping, and ambushing techniques that were specifically adapted for capturing human victims, while minimizing the risk of detection or resistance. The agricultural practices employed by the clan were designed to supplement their cannibalistic diet while providing cover for their illegal activities. They maintained small farms that produced enough legitimate food to support their basic nutritional needs, while relying on human flesh to provide the protein and psychological satisfaction that had become central to their cultural identity. The clan's trade relationships with the outside world were carefully managed to obtain necessary supplies and information while maintaining their secret cannibalistic practices. They used intermediaries and false identities to conduct business with merchants and suppliers who had no knowledge of their true activities or the horrifying nature of their mountain community. The preservation and storage techniques developed by the clan for human flesh revealed sophisticated understanding of food science and preservation methods that allowed them to maintain supplies of human meat throughout the year. They had developed systems for smoking, drying, and preserving human flesh that were adapted from traditional meat preservation techniques, but modified for their specific requirements. The cooking and preparation methods used by the clan included elaborate recipes and techniques that were passed down through generations and refined through decades of practice. The clan had developed a sophisticated cuisine based on human flesh that included various cooking methods, seasoning combinations, and presentation styles that reflected their twisted aesthetic sensibilities. The ritualistic aspects of food preparation were as important as the nutritional benefits, with elaborate ceremonies accompanying every stage of the process from slaughter through consumption. The clan had developed religious significance for every aspect of their cannibalistic practices, transforming murder and consumption into sacred acts that reinforced their spiritual beliefs and social cohesion. The clan's understanding of human anatomy and butchering techniques was extensive and sophisticated, reflecting generations of experience in processing human bodies for consumption. They had developed detailed knowledge of which body parts provided the best nutrition, which organs had the greatest spiritual significance, and which preparation methods produced the most satisfactory results. The medical practices within the clan were adapted to support their cannibalistic lifestyle, while maintaining the health and viability of their isolated population. The clan's healers had developed treatments for diseases and conditions that were specifically related to their dietary practices, while also maintaining knowledge of traditional mountain medicine for treating conventional ailments. The clan's understanding of nutrition and health was influenced by their belief that consuming human flesh provided unique health benefits that were unavailable through conventional diets. They attributed their survival and perceived vitality to their cannibalistic practices, while dismissing evidence of the psychological and physical damage that resulted from their lifestyle. The psychological effects of long-term cannibalistic practices on clan members were complex and varied, ranging from apparent normalization of horrific behaviors to severe mental illness and psychological breakdown. Some individuals appeared to function normally within the clan's twisted social structure, while others showed signs of severe trauma and mental disturbance that reflected the inherent horror of their situation. The social hierarchy within the clan was based on a combination of age, gender, spiritual authority, and demonstrated commitment to cannibalistic practices. The patriarchal structure was dominated by male elders who controlled religious ceremonies and made decisions about victim selection and ritual procedures, while women were assigned roles in food preparation and child indoctrination. The clan's leadership structure included specialized roles for individuals who demonstrated particular skills or enthusiasm for different aspects of their cannibalistic practices. These included master butchers who were responsible for processing victims, spiritual leaders who conducted religious ceremonies, and hunters who specialized in capturing human prey. The punishment and enforcement systems within the clan were designed to maintain discipline and prevent defection while ensuring complete participation in cannibalistic practices. Individuals who showed reluctance or resistance were subjected to psychological manipulation, physical punishment, and ultimately selection for consumption if their attitudes could not be corrected. The clan's methods for dealing with dissent and resistance revealed sophisticated understanding of psychological control techniques that were designed to eliminate opposition while maintaining the appearance of voluntary participation. The combination of religious indoctrination, social pressure, and physical intimidation created a system that was virtually impossible to resist or escape. The escape attempts documented in clan records revealed the extreme measures taken to prevent defection and maintain secrecy about their cannibalistic practices. Individuals who attempted to leave the community were typically recaptured and subjected to elaborate punishment rituals that served as examples to discourage other potential defectors. The few successful escapes from the clan, including Ezra Thompson, who eventually guided federal investigators to the settlement, involved extraordinary circumstances and considerable luck that allowed individuals to overcome the psychological and physical barriers that normally prevented departure from the community. The psychological trauma experienced by clan defectors was severe and long-lasting, reflecting the difficulty of adapting to normal society after being raised in a community where murder and cannibalism were considered sacred duties. The survivors required extensive psychological treatment and support to overcome the conditioning that had shaped their entire understanding of human relationships and moral behavior. The federal investigation of the Grayson case revealed the extent to which local authorities and community members had been aware of suspicious activities in the Klan's territory, while choosing to ignore or cover up evidence of criminal behavior. The conspiracy of silence that surrounded the Klan reflected both fear of their violent capabilities and complicity in maintaining their isolation. Local law enforcement officials had received reports of missing persons and suspicious activities in the Klan's territory for decades, but had failed to investigate thoroughly due to a combination of incompetence, corruption, and deliberate avoidance of dangerous situations. The investigation revealed systemic failures in law enforcement that had enabled the Klan to continue their practices without serious interference. The political implications of the Grayson case extended beyond law enforcement failures to include questions about government responsibilities for monitoring isolated communities and protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation and violence. The case highlighted the challenges of balancing respect for religious freedom and cultural autonomy with the need to prevent systematic criminal activity. The media coverage of the Grayson case was carefully controlled to prevent public panic, while ensuring that appropriate warnings were provided about the dangers of extremist religious communities. The coverage revealed the difficulty of reporting on cases involving systematic violence and deviant behavior, without sensationalizing the crimes or providing information that might inspire copycat activities. The academic study of the Grayson case contributed to understanding of religious extremism, social isolation, and the psychological mechanisms that enable systematic violence within closed communities. The case provided researchers with unprecedented access to documentation of cannibalistic practices and the belief systems that sustained them across multiple generations. The anthropological analysis of Grayson Klan culture revealed how isolated communities could develop social norms and practices that were completely divorced from mainstream human values while maintaining internal consistency and social cohesion. The case demonstrated the power of cultural conditioning to normalize behaviors that would be considered abhorrent by outside observers. The linguistic analysis of Klan communications revealed the development of specialized vocabulary and concepts that reflected their unique cultural practices and belief systems. The Klan had developed terminology for cannibalistic practices, victim categories, and spiritual concepts that had no equivalents in standard English or conventional religious discourse. The theological analysis of Grayson religious writings revealed sophisticated techniques for perverting mainstream religious concepts to justify extreme violence and deviant behavior. The writings demonstrated how religious authority could be manipulated to override normal moral constraints while maintaining the appearance of spiritual legitimacy. The psychological analysis of Klan conditioning techniques revealed methods for indoctrination and control that were remarkably sophisticated and effective in maintaining compliance with practices that violated fundamental human moral instincts. The techniques included elements that would later be recognized as advanced forms of brainwashing and psychological manipulation. The medical analysis of physical evidence from the Klan settlement provided insights into the health effects of long-term cannibalistic practices on both perpetrators and victims. The evidence revealed various diseases and conditions that were related to their dietary practices, while also documenting the physical trauma inflicted on victims during ritual killings. The forensic analysis of human remains found at the settlement provided evidence of systematic torture, mutilation, and consumption that had been practiced for decades. The forensic evidence corroborated witness testimony while revealing details about the Klan's methods and practices that would have been difficult to determine through other means. The legal analysis of the Grayson case revealed significant challenges in prosecuting crimes that had been committed over extended periods by individuals who had been conditioned from birth to participate in systematic violence. The case raised complex questions about criminal responsibility, mental competency, and appropriate punishment for individuals who had been shaped by circumstances beyond their control. The international implications of the Grayson case influenced discussions about human rights, religious freedom, and government responsibilities for protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation and violence. The case provided evidence that systematic abuse could occur within supposedly civilized societies while remaining hidden from outside observation and intervention. The long-term impact of the Grayson case on law enforcement practices included the development of specialized training and protocols for investigating isolated communities and religious extremist groups. The case demonstrated the importance of taking seriously reports of unusual religious practices and the need for sustained investigation of communities that maintained suspicious isolation from mainstream society. The influence of the Grayson case on psychiatric and psychological practice included the development of new approaches for treating individuals who had been subjected to extreme conditioning and trauma within closed religious communities. The case provided insights into the psychological mechanisms of indoctrination while revealing the challenges of rehabilitation for individuals who had been raised in systematically abusive environments. The impact of the Grayson case on child protection policies included increased attention to the rights of children within religious communities and the development of protocols for identifying and addressing systematic abuse that was justified through religious beliefs. The case highlighted the vulnerability of children within isolated communities while demonstrating the need for proactive intervention to protect vulnerable populations. The influence of the Grayson case on religious freedom jurisprudence included discussions about the appropriate limits of religious practice and the circumstances under which government intervention in religious communities is justified. The case provided a clear example of religious practices that violated fundamental human rights while challenging assumptions about the inherent value of religious autonomy. The legacy of the Grayson case in academic research includes ongoing studies of religious extremism, social isolation, and the conditions that enable systematic violence within human communities. The case continues to provide researchers with valuable insights into the darkest aspects of human behavior, while revealing the fragility of moral constraints under extreme circumstances. The preservation of evidence and documentation from the Grayson case has created a unique resource for understanding the development and maintenance of cannibalistic practices within human communities. The materials provide unprecedented detail about the psychological, social, and cultural factors that enabled ordinary people to participate in systematic murder and consumption while maintaining their sense of moral righteousness. The ethical questions raised by the Grayson case continue to influence discussions about research methodology, victim rights, and the appropriate use of information gathered from criminal investigations. The case highlighted the tension between academic interest in understanding extreme behavior and the need to respect the dignity of victims while avoiding sensationalization of their suffering. The contemporary relevance of the Grayson case includes its value as a warning about the potential for isolated communities to develop deviant practices without outside detection or intervention. The case demonstrates the importance of maintaining connections between communities and the broader society, while providing mechanisms for reporting and addressing systematic abuse. The lessons learned from the Grayson case have influenced policies for monitoring and supporting isolated communities, while respecting their legitimate desires for autonomy and privacy. The case provided a model for balancing community rights with individual protection, while demonstrating the need for proactive intervention when systematic abuse is suspected. The Grayson clan's dark legacy serves as a powerful reminder of the potential for human beings to descend into depths of depravity that challenge our understanding of moral boundaries and social norms. Their story demonstrates how isolation, extremist leadership, and gradual moral corruption can transform ordinary people into participants in systematic evil while maintaining their conviction that they are serving a higher purpose. The horrifying practices of the Grayson clan, who fed on their own family members for nearly a century, stand as testimony to the fragility of moral constraints and the dangerous potential of religious extremism when combined with isolation and charismatic leadership. Their legacy continues to influence our understanding of human nature, while serving as a warning about the conditions that can enable the most heinous crimes to flourish hidden within seemingly normal communities. The empty settlement where the Grayson clan practiced their cannibalistic rituals now serves as a protected site for ongoing research into the psychological and social factors that enabled their horrifying practices. Their story reminds us that the capacity for evil exists within human nature, and that eternal vigilance is required to prevent the development of communities and belief systems that can transform ordinary people into monsters who prey upon their own family members while believing themselves to be serving God.